Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. The first hour today, we're going to spend some time looking back at that Planned Parenthood video series. There are two and more to come, so we'll be talking about that, its implications, whether or not to defund Planned Parenthood, who receives every year $528 million of our taxpayer funds. And so we'll talk about some of that and give you a chance once again, if you have not done so, to let your elected representatives know how you feel about this issue. We have a take action item there so that you can let your two senators and your representative know. We also have some videos. And in the second hour, we're going to be joined by Ryan Anderson talking about marriage, and especially the Supreme Court decision that came down on same-sex marriage and what that might mean to you, your family, and your church. So lots to talk about today. Our first guest is Arina Grossu. She is the director of the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council, graduate of the University of Notre Dame, also has an MA in theology from the Dominican School of House of Studies, and is an individual that has appeared on a lot of different talk shows and joins us now by phone. So, Arina, thank you for joining us today.
Hi, Kirby. Thanks for having me.
Let's get into these issues. You know, we almost had a vote, or at least we had the potential for a vote yesterday, but between the conflict between Ted Cruz and Mitch McConnell, Ted Cruz was trying to get a roll call vote. He couldn't even get enough individuals because of the kind of the pressure that the majority leader put on them. But Mike Lee was going to actually try to use a procedure to force a vote on defunding Planned Parenthood. That did not happen, but I think soon other push and some other pieces of legislation that will be considered to defund Planned Parenthood. So what do you know?
Well, you know, in the House last week, 80 original co-sponsor joined Congressman Black and introduced a bill called Defund Planned Parenthood Act of 2015 to stop all funding to Planned Parenthood. And then, of course, in the Senate, we had the bipartisan Senate letter with 49 fellow senators raising their concerns and wanting HHS and urging HHS to investigate and comply with investigations of Planned Parenthood. So the pressure is still on, and we want to get to the bottom of this, see what the investigations reveal about all of the different videos that have shown Planned Parenthood's practices.
Let's, we can maybe get into some of the videos. I know you have some comments about that. Family Research Council, of course, published some comments by Tony Perkins, but I know you were probably part of that as well. This latest video is beyond the pale and demands immediate action by Congress. He's referring to the second set of videos that we've seen now. And in a sense, he says the Republican leadership in Congress should move quickly to pass a moratorium on federal taxpayer funding to the billion-dollar abortion giant that derives nearly half of its money from American taxpayers. It seems to me that this would be a very important two-step process that you just talked about. One, an investigation to see if any laws were broken, because right now the argument is, well, these are reimbursements, but when you start haggling over prices, it sounds like a little bit more than that. And then number two, the issue of defunding. You've looked at the videos, or certainly have looked at the transcripts. Give us your assessment of the ones that have appeared so far.
I've done both, a look at the small videos and then also at the transcripts of the entire videos. And first of all, it's horrific what was captured. And so nonchalantly, the way that Deborah Nucatola spoke about taking brains, livers, hearts, so nonchalantly over her meal. And then also Mary Goddard, who's the president of Planned Parenthood's Medical Directors Council, talking about using quote-unquote less crunchy techniques and so that they can get intact organs. This is not woman-centered action. This is an exploitation of women. It's the exploitation of vulnerable women who are getting abortions and then exploiting the children's bodies. And so we're seeing this in video, and we're going to see more of this. In fact, I think there are at least 10 more videos coming out. But we're going to see more and more revealed about Planned Parenthood and their practices. And like you said, it is haggling over prices. When they're talking about, well, I won't say the way that Mary Goddard said, well, I won't give the first price. What are you offering? This is not a donation. They're looking to make a profit. And David DeLayden from CMP has captured primary source documents showing orders, procurement orders for organs that then they use in the morning. So, for example, Deborah Nucatola talked about how in the mornings she plans on what organs to get based on the order forms.
That's just incredible. Let's deal with a couple of questions. Some people said, well, these might not necessarily be representative of Planned Parenthood, but Dr. Deborah Nucatola is the Senior Director of Medical Services for Planned Parenthood. Dr. Mary Gatter is actually the President of Planned Parenthood's Medical Directors Council. These individuals are pretty high up, aren't they?
They are, and as Deborah Nucatola made very clear, their law department in the national offices didn't really want this in any way based nationally, and so they're doing all of this at the local level with different Planned Parenthoods. But of course, at the national level, Cecile Richards is aware, as are all these top staffers of Planned Parenthood, and they are cooperating with organ trafficking.
Let's see if we can, maybe, since you mentioned Cecile Richards as the head of Planned Parenthood, she has been on some of the talk shows and made the case that these are highly edited videos. You have had a chance to look at them in a much more detail than perhaps even most of our listeners. Are these edited? Are we taking things completely out of context? I mean, she said the context is out of context and the comments aren't necessarily representative, and on and on and on. What about that? Because it does seem to me that we have now the whole video. We can look at from start to finish. They've obviously shortened it so that you can get to the meat of the debate, but I don't sense that there is a lack of context. What did you find?
There's no lack of context. When any person who claims to be a doctor says, we've been very good at getting heart, lung, liver, I'm not going to crush that part, I'm going to crush below, I'm going to crush above. There's one part where she says, this 17-weeker, I knew what the cases were, and I would see what would yield what was needed. And she also said that she wanted to work with affiliates so that they understand what the, quote, end game is, unquote. And so this can never be taken out of context. And when she starts talking about, quote, more about the profit side of it. And that it's, even though they use language that says donations, it's not what they mean. It's just a filler for what they're actually doing because that's the way that they're trained to talk about it. So I encourage everybody to watch the videos. And just because they call them donations, actually there are parts where she doesn't even call that the donation.
Mm-hmm. Yes,
and she exactly, and she talks about the coercion. I mean, she doesn't mention that it's coercion, but she talks about how biotech companies actually wait in the waiting room with women who have not signed the permission form to try to convince them to change their mind. And so, this has nothing to do with donation. It has to do with the profit.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation for just a few more minutes, but also giving you an action item. We also will tell you a little bit more about what you can find at the Family Research Council, because there's some great material and information there as well. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
If you think about it, many of the stories in the news today have a common denominator, the rule of law. Victor Davis Hanson in a recent column reminds us that the barbarians at the gate are usually not the reason for the downfall of a civilization. Corruption within a country is what collapses a country. Take Greece, for example. He argues that all the German euros in the world will not save Greece if Greeks continue to dodge taxes, featherbed government, and see corruption as a business model. He even goes on to argue that obeying minor laws is important. It is no coincidence that a country where drivers routinely flout traffic laws and throw trash out the window is also a country that cooks its books and lies to creditors. Everything from littering to speeding seems negotiable in Athens in a way that is not true of Munich, Zurich, or London. Of course, we can also apply the same principle to other countries in the world. If you've ever traveled to countries in Africa, the Middle East, or South America, you recognize the same disregard for the rule of law. If you want to get something done in these countries, you need to figure out which government official needs to be bribed. If you're involved in a business, a government inspector is usually looking for a kickback. In many countries, your advancement in business or government is determined not by your resume, not by any merit. Your economic class or your family connections or your tribe determines your success. If you need a public service, your success is determined by who you know or your position on a family tree. At this point, you may be thinking how grateful you are to be living in America. We're blessed to have less corruption than many other countries, but we also appear to be heading down the same path. We have a president that has been unwilling to enforce certain laws. Sanctuary cities ignore immigration laws. Politicians at the federal and state level have been charged with corruption. We desperately need to reinforce the belief in the rule of law before America looks like these other countries. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
The column that came out by Charles Kruthammer the other day, I think, illustrates it only so well. He says Planned Parenthood's reaction to the release of a clandestinely recorded conversation about the sale of fetal body parts was highly revealing. After protesting that it did nothing illegal, it apologized for the tone of one of its senior directors. Her remarks lacked compassion, admitted Planned Parenthood President Cecile Richards, as if Dr. Deborah Nicotola's cold and casual discussion over salad and wine of how the fetal body can be crushed with forceps in a way that leaves valuable organs intact for sale is some kind of personal idiosyncrasy. On the contrary, it's precisely the kind of psychic numbing that occurs when dealing daily with industrial-scale destruction of growing, thriving, and recognizably human fetuses. They says this was demonstrated by the release this week of a second video showing another official sporting that same tone, casual and even jocular, while haggling over the price of an embryonic liver. If it's still low, then we can bump it up. I want a Lamborghini. Arina Grossu is with us, and she is, again, the director of the Center for Human Dignity at the Family Research Council. And Arina, let's for just a minute talk about what we can do. I have one of the pieces we've posted. Senators, it's your turn to protect pain-capable unborn babies. There's a piece of legislation introduced by Lindsey Graham, and it seems to me that that would be another very good action point, don't you think?
Of course. I mean, the pro-life community is completely based in science, and it's the people who are pro-abortion who are denying what science already reveals. We already know that babies can feel pain by 20 weeks post-fertilization. We have the ultrasounds to see their development. We already know that doctors use anesthesia on babies by 20 weeks post-fertilization when they do in utero surgeries, and yet these very same babies, in one room, one baby is getting saved, and in fact, even the New England Journal of Medicine is saying that viability should drop to 20 weeks because babies can survive. So in one room, babies are being saved at that age, and in the other room, babies are being aborted and their organs are being harvested by staffers at Planned Parenthood. And so what we can do is continue to push fetal pain bans throughout different states. In terms of Planned Parenthood, there are already 9 investigations in 9 different states going on at the state level, and of course we're going to continue pushing that Planned Parenthood is defunded.
You know, in your piece that you wrote, and it was a couple of weeks ago, but I'm sure all the facts are still accurate, the United States is not in an enviable position. When you look at the countries around the world that allow abortion after 20 weeks, we're in a fairly small club with countries like North Korea.
Mm-hmm. North Korea, China, Vietnam, Cambodia, Canada. These are the countries that we stand with and that allow abortions after 20 weeks. We know we can save these babies. We know that at least 13,000 babies in America die each year after 20 weeks post-fertilization, and they feel excruciating pain. If we were talking about puppies or kittens, everyone would be up in arms. And yet here we have human babies that are in excruciating pain, that are being killed by these various abortion methods, and we must do something to stop this in America.
You know, there's one of those things where we talked about it on Friday. We had Penna Dexter here and Debbie Georgiadis, and Debbie Georgiadis said, you know, just imagine in your mind's eye for just a minute that maybe there was a veterinarian that was taking various puppies in utero and then squishing them and taking their organs and using those for as any kind of scientific experimentation. I mean, you'd have PETA at its front door, and there would be, I think there's a sense in which, Arina, we've been so almost callous to this that, as you said, if this happened to animals, we would just be horrified, and yet it took something this gross. It took these two doctors talking almost like they were reading a script from a dialogue for Hannibal Lecter for a lot of people to wake up and say, wait a minute, what indeed is going on right now?
Well, I think that women are feeling betrayed because they've been told when they go in, and how many countless women are post-abortive and shocked at what is coming out of Planned Parenthood's mouth, because they've been told that those are not babies, those are blobs of tissue. And now when they hear the senior Planned Parenthood officials talking about baby organs, they're wondering what? So this is very schizophrenic. On one hand, you're saying that was not a baby. On the other hand, you're saying, well, this non-baby has human organs that I can now sell to companies for research. And so it's very schizophrenic. And I came upon a quote from the Nuremberg trials where the Nazi doctor Julius Hallervorden said, if we're going to kill all these Jewish people, at least take the brains out so that the material may be utilized. And this is the same argument that Planned Parenthood is making. Well, we can do so much research with these quote-unquote fetal tissue. But how is that any different than the abuse of human beings in Nazi Germany when their organs were used for experimentation?
Wow. Now let's make the connection. Some people might say, okay, you're talking about the Pain Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, but how does that relate to organs? And it seems to me that the best place for Planned Parenthood to harvest those organs are with those later trimester abortions. True?
Those organs sell for more. In fact, on CMP's website, they list STEM Express's order form, and the older the babies are and the more developed their organs are, the more they go for. And they actually have pay columns for different organs because they are worth more than others. And on STEM Express's website, you can actually click on what age baby you want organs from.
Wow.
So of course the older ones are the ones that all these different companies are very much interested in because they're developed, they're bigger, and they sell for more.
You know, as I mentioned just a minute ago, you're with the Family Research Council, and we also, of course, have had Tony Perkins on quite regularly. I like what he says in one of his pieces. What do you have to do to lose your government funding these days? Well, believe in natural marriage or run a pro-life charity, but defraud taxpayers, cover up child sexual abuse, botch abortions, and scavenge babies for body parts. You're untouchable. I don't think so this time. Maybe not untouchable. So one action item I would think would be, of course, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. The other would be defunding Planned Parenthood. Let's drive people to your website, to Family Research Council, frc.org. What are some of the resources that are available at your website?
We have a Planned Parenthood fact sheet, which shows not only how much money Planned Parenthood is currently making, but also how all of these other services that they tout to provide, cancer screening, prevention, prenatal services, breast exams, they've been going down significantly, cut in half since 2009, yet their abortion rate keeps going up, and they're building these big abortion centers. And so why should taxpayer money be going to fund an organization, like you said, that not only kills babies, but takes their parts and sells them for more profit, covers up sex trafficking, sexual abuse, et cetera, and how can anyone defend such an organization? What other nonprofit organization do you know of that has a revenue of $1.3 billion and does so much horrible stuff for humans against both women and their children, and yet still is not defunded?
Well, appreciate you being on the program with us. We certainly value the great partnership we've had over the years with Family Research Council, so thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kirby.
We're going to take a break, and we've given you sort of your marching orders. There are a couple of resources that I think you can find available, and we certainly mentioned Family Research Council on our own website. Of course, we have the Take Action item there, and that one today allows you to tell your 2 United States senators and your representative that you believe that you should and we should defund Planned Parenthood. $528 million in government funds annually from your pockets. What does that mean? So that's the first issue. Of course, we also talked about one that is also on our action alert there, the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act, which was introduced in the Senate. We've given you an opportunity there to contact your senators. I recognize some of you live in states where senators may not support that, but they still need to hear from you. But I also have noticed that lately, even some of the so-called pro-choice senators and representatives are starting to say, I don't know, this is really hard to justify sending tax dollars to a very profitable, quote, nonprofit organization that is now trafficking in these body parts. And at least you would, I think, encourage them to investigate whether or not there have been any laws broken. But I think at the very least, we could even ask for a defunding of that. Our tax dollars do not need to go to an organization that is engaged in these kinds of practices. That's just as simple as it can be. And I don't care if you're pro-life or pro-choice. I think it's pretty hard to defend this. We've seen some try, but I don't think we're going to see it. Let's take a break, though, and I will give you an opportunity, if you'd like to join our conversation, to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Anika Smith will be with us. She's written a piece which we've posted here as well, giving you a little more insight into Planned Parenthood. We'll talk about more of that after these important messages.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kirby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send 5, they send 5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today about Planned Parenthood's videos, and we now bring to the microphone Anika Smith, and of course she is one of many of the writers for the stream. She's the associate editor. We've had, of course, John Smirick in studio. We had Jay Richards. We've had a lot of people with the stream, and if you aren't familiar with that, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. She is not only the associate editor for the stream, but also in the past has worked as, for example, the project director for the National Association of Evangelicals and a policy analyst at the Discovery Institute. Anika, it's great to have you on the program with us today.
Oh, thanks for having me here, Kirby. I appreciate it.
We have posted your article, Planned Parenthood Abortionist Haggles Over Payments for Intact Fetal Specimens, in new video. I want to get to that in just a minute, but since we might want to put those in order, let's look at the first video for just a second. You have Dr. Deborah Nucatola, Senior Director of Medical Services at Planned Parenthood, and she seems to be, while drinking wine and having a Caesar salad, explaining how you want to make sure that you don't crush certain parts of this baby, because after all, you want to be able to harvest a heart, a lung, a liver. What were your thoughts about watching that video?
Well, like most people, it was, I think, so disturbing. I got a little physically ill. It's the sort of confrontation with the violence of abortion and the dehumanization that I think also affected the Western troops who came in to Germany at the end of World War II and were confronted with concentration camps and the reality of what was done to the populations there. I mean, it's so grotesquely evil that I think it turns something very visceral and very deep inside. But also, I have to say, a lot of pity and compassion for Dr. Nucatola. And it's interesting, if you read the interviews or listen to the interviews with the filmmaker, David DeLayden, or DeDalen, sorry about that, he is really clear that he's developed relationships with these people in getting the access to them, in working over 30 months, I believe, to put these videos together. And he mentioned, like, this is someone who he considered a friend and who he developed a relationship with and who he prays for. And I think, remembering that these abortionists, they know not what they're doing. They don't see the humanity of the children that they are harvesting. And remembering to have never know where the next Abby Johnson is going to come from.
Well, certainly. Again, we are talking with Anika Smith, and this is just an opportunity to focus on a couple of these videos. Of course, 2 out, more to come, as we've already heard. And Anika, let's get to your piece here, because the second one is with Dr. Mary Gatter. Now, this is an individual that is the president of Planned Parenthood's Medical Directors Council. And this video told us a lot more, whereas the first one we began to wonder, are they trafficking in fetal body parts? But some people could simply say, well, okay, they are telling you how to get them, but they might not be violating the law because they might just be following those principles. But then when you see Dr. Mary Gatter, she seems to be haggling for a price. That doesn't sound like the sort of allowed reimbursement for handling and shipping and those kinds of things that were part of the allowed principles. So what did you come away from in terms of that second video?
Right. I mean, this is really clearly showing that if Planned Parenthood affiliates were only reimbursed for cost, it would be a fixed price for each specimen, to use their rather euphemistic term, for each fetal body part that they sell. But here we have someone who's very clearly working at a market and who even says, let me check back and see what other affiliates are getting before we agree upon a price, because she's asking for the going price and going to maximize her profit. It's a very clear profit motive working within this abortion system. And it also, I mean, rather ghoulishly, she was joking about, I want a Lamborghini. And it's clear in the context that's a joke. She's probably not getting a Lamborghini from this, but she is getting money, and she is really aware of making the most that she possibly can for her abortion center.
Yes, and I appreciate you mentioning in the article it's a joke, and well, we understand that it is, and it's kind of a crude one, but nevertheless it illustrates that it's still, this is maybe a little bit more than just the basic reimbursement. And this is an organization that receives $528 million of our taxpayers' dollars every year. It's got a financial footprint about the size of the NCAA. It aborts almost, just pretty close to 1/3 of a million babies every year. And so we have, I think, some fundamental questions that we talked about a little bit in the first part of this hour, and that is defunding Planned Parenthood, passing a pain-capable Unborn Child Protection Act. There are some legal remedies. It does seem to me, though, that this is a question that needs to be asked. Why do we have a tax benefit to Planned Parenthood? Because it's in the profit-making business. Why do we use taxpayer dollars? And why do we allow them to have access to second and third trimester babies so that they can maximize their profits? And those are all political questions, which are maybe a little outside of your expertise, but still they're relevant questions to trying to address this issue of Planned Parenthood, aren't they?
Absolutely. And they're questions that every journalist should be asking, which is why it's a little frustrating when you see the coverage and what you're getting instead is Planned Parenthood attacked by anti-abortionist radicals. And then they try to make the story about the people behind the undercover videos, which is, and they don't have a lot to work with, but they're trying to make character assassinations. Cecil Richards was on George Stephanopoulos this weekend, and she kept trying to claim, she went back to her talking point again and again, like this is a very militant anti-abortion, wing of the anti-abortion movement, in her words. And she also claimed that this is the same wing of the pro-life movement, which I take some issue with that is killing abortionists in their homes and churches. And the fact that she was able to say that and no one called her out on it.
Yeah, nobody said, wait, wait a minute, you know. In fact, for a while, people didn't really know too much about the Center for Medical Progress, and I think that was kind of wise because it didn't give them much of a target to shoot at anyway. And again, let's put a scale out here. On the one hand, you have the trafficking of abortion and certainly the possible trafficking of abortion parts. We'll leave that to the investigation. And the receiving of $528 million in our taxpayers. And on the other side of that equation, the charge was, well, this was a group that entrapped, and I'm not sure where the entrapment comes playing because they were quite willing to say this over lunch, entrap those individuals, and then they are pro-life. And I was like, okay, I don't even see the moral equivalence between the two of those, if you will permit me for just a minute. But nevertheless, that is the way it was said. And one other one I want to ask, I did ask this of our previous guest, but I want to ask you as well. The thing that Cecile Richards keeps coming back to is that these are highly edited or they're taken out of context. Yeah. Not all of our listeners have seen the videos, although we've put them on our website, pointofview.net. They can watch the videos. They can read your article from the stream. We have a defund Planned Parenthood action item. But you have seen them. You've looked at transcripts. Is that argument, is that criticism fair at all?
It's utterly ridiculous. I mean, they're edited in the same way any news segment is edited, as in you're selecting certain portions and not giving the whole thing. But those videos are representative examples. And if anyone's going to be highly editing something, like in the style of Jon Stewart on The Daily Show, where you splice answers to questions to different questions and do something totally deceptive and misleading, that's something that you would do without showing the whole video, which is exactly what the Center for Medical Progress did. They released the full-length video simultaneously within half an hour of posting the 9-minute excerpts. And the interesting thing is, these full-length videos are actually more damning. I think it's in the Mary Gatter video, the second one, where she is actually talking a little more about how it needs to be, how it's a little questionable if it's legal to make money, get so much money for the body parts. And her quote is, "We didn't have to do anything to get them," which again goes against the claim that this is just covering the cost of transportation and storage for these baby body parts. I think that's a really damning quote, but it's not in the original video. In the edited one, highly edited video, that's from the full transcript, from the full video. Anyone can watch these. All journalists who are reporting this should, instead of just repeating Planned Parenthood's talking points ad nauseum. If you just watch the video, you can see how representative and how fair this is.
We're going to take a break, and we'll come back and take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Anika Smith with us. We'll be back right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
I'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Privileged to have with us today Anika Smith. And let's go to Georgia first. Richard, thank you for joining us. What would you like to add to the conversation today?
Hi, how are you?
I have a little trouble hearing you. Let me try again. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Let's go to Josh in Pennsylvania first. Josh, thank you for calling.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yes, love to hear from you.
So, I just think that it's ironic that the Jane Fonda type, Hannah White Jane type, who, spit on servicemen and called them baby killers, who are coming back from Vietnam, are the very same people who, ironically, are promoting the killing of babies, and that's they're in support of this.
Well, that's interesting. I'd never really seen that connection, Jane Fonda and Planned Parenthood. But you've got Cecile Richards. As a matter of fact, I might mention that her mother used to be the governor in the state of Texas. So they're a very well-placed individual indeed. Let's go back to Richard. Let's see if I can get a little better opportunity to hear from you. Richard, what would you like to add to the conversation?
Hi there. Your caller from the Family Research Council touched on an interesting point with Planned Parenthood making a big profit while simultaneously supporting, in her view, child exploitation.
Uh-huh.
Has she ever heard of the Catholic Church?
Well, I mean, I understand that could be, but let's stay on the topic. And I think the real issue is the issue of, and Anika, I'd love to get your comments about this, because you have to see some of these videos. Let's use the phrase. Because other organizations like Lila Rose, for example, and Live Action have been able to demonstrate that individuals, for example, have gone into Planned Parenthood clinics and talked to individuals about the fact that they are pregnant because of somebody that is over age and they are underage, so that's statutory rape, and they say, well, then just change the age or lie about it. I've had individuals call and say, I'd like to donate to Planned Parenthood so that my money could be used to abort more black babies because I want to get rid of the African American race, and on and on and on. There are just an enormous number of these videos that precede the Center for Medical Progress. And it is amazing that in the midst of all of that, Planned Parenthood still basically has been able to receive $500 million of our tax dollars every single year.
Yeah, the interesting thing about Planned Parenthood is with they function like a franchise, and so with these other sting operation videos that Lila has done, and actually Delayden works with Lila Rose and is good friends with her. And so he cut his teeth on these. And these one-off clinics who may or may not have been representative. Planned Parenthood of America, the mothership, was able to distance themselves and say, that's just that one place out there. We will deal with them. We will discipline them. But this is really just one unfortunate incident, and the video's been highly edited, et cetera, et cetera.
Let's take another phone call real quickly and get into a few more of those issues. But in California, KYCC, Chris, what's your comment?
Well, I just want to know why the liberals are so pro-gun control, but yet, pro-abortion. And you look at what's happening in the Middle East, all the Christians that are being beheaded, and they don't speak out about that. I mean, it's like, where are people's priority? I mean, we have, 3 million abortions a year here?
Well, it's more than about 1 million plus, but still, 300,000 abortions, more than 300,000 abortions just from Planned Parenthood. That is kind of intriguing because on the one hand, I have found individuals that would identify themselves as pro-choice or progressive or liberal. On the one hand, they support a so-called woman's right to choose. And yet, Anika, on the other hand, they're very much against any kind of harm that might come to an animal. They might be members of PETA, and they would be horrified if they even found that a veterinarian was aborting maybe a pregnant dog. And so you do have this schizophrenia. The first hour, we talked about the fact that if you get into the Pain-Capable Unborn Babies Act, we are now able to save babies oftentimes that are 20 weeks of gestation. That's almost 5 months. And we've seen those in neonatology clinics and things like that, neonatal clinics all the time. But on the other hand, down the hallway, they might be aborting a second trimester baby because a mother wants it aborted. So consistency is not something we find right now in those that support the so-called abortion rights.
That's absolutely right. I think it's also worth noting that abortion is a really hidden problem. Even the mother is denied seeing the humanity of her child and dealing with it. It's very clinical, very antiseptic. It's just done and you're out. And your body is grieving something that you don't understand. Whereas dealing with something like PETA, you're confronted with animal cruelty. It goes out to your heart. What these videos are doing is they're revealing what is going on behind the doors of Planned Parenthood, the humanity of the children inside the womb, and the violence, like that gruesome description of the dismemberment and the partial birth abortion in the first video.
Well, again, let me encourage people to read your piece that was in the stream. And we have encouraged our listeners to go to thestream.org because it's a great resource. We had Jay Richards on, John Smirek, a number of other writers, including yourself. And I know some people that have actually made it their homepage because they want to see what you guys are writing about. And this piece is entitled Planned Parenthood Abortionist Haggles Over Payments for Intact Fetal Specimens in New Video. And again, a lot of great work that the various people at the stream are doing, and appreciate your work as the associate editor there. So thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Oh, thanks so much, Kirby.
Let's do it again. We're going to take a break, and just before we do so, let's give you some action items. We've mentioned them before, but we have given you a couple. Opportunity. First one is, of course, if you go to our website right now and it says Take Action, you will see the opportunity for you to contact your 2 senators and your representative about this issue of Planned Parenthood. Now, I sent out an email that you might have received if you receive emails from us, so you can either use that link or the one on the website, pointofview.net. If you don't know your 2 senators or your representative, you should, but if you don't, that's okay, because as you type in your name and address, it will pop those individuals up. As a matter of fact, if you do that and have done that in the past, then it will actually recognize you instantaneously, and that gives you an opportunity then to contact your senators and representatives about this issue. We give $528 million. We give some of your tax dollars out every single day to them, and there was a good article that came out recently by Shannon Bream at Fox News, Taxpayer Calculator. How much would it cost you if, or actually benefit you, but how much would it cost Planned Parenthood if they were defunded, and how much would you save in terms of tax dollars? How much would the government save? And so there was one very good action item. If you have not seen the videos, what we have right now is the most recent one. It's the 9-minute video. Then you can follow the links and watch all of them if you would like. But the 9-minute video that has just come out by that it was about Dr. Mary Gatter, who is the president of Planned Parenthood's Medical Directors Council, and you can watch it and even leave your own comments about that as well. And for those of you that have not done so in the past, we've encouraged you to tell your 2 senators to support the Pain-Capable Unborn Child Protection Act. It was introduced just a few weeks ago by Senator Lindsey Graham, and it has 44 other co-sponsors. So there are some action items for you. We encourage you to take those action items and to do something with them. We give it to you so that you can be educated about the issue, you can be empowered, we equip you to make a difference. We're going to take a break, come back with more right after this.
There is a big incentive to pay your electric bill. If you don't, you find yourself in the dark. But who pays to make sure you're educated on the key issues of the day, to bring you wisdom for life at work, at home, and in the culture? Like you hear from guests here on Point of View. Who makes sure that our electric bill gets paid? You're way ahead of me, aren't you? That's right. You do. The truth is, if every listener this week gave just $5, we could pay our bills for about the next 3 years. Did you hear me? $5, 3 years. Now, perhaps you can give more. How about $50 or $500, maybe even more, but please don't be the one who fails to send at least $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Whatever amount you chip in, thank you for your gift. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kirby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I'm constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, we're going to be talking about same-sex marriage and the Supreme Court decision that has come down and what that means for the future. One of the best and most staunch defenders of marriage these days has been Ryan Anderson. Perhaps you've seen some of the videos of him, perhaps when he was on Piers Morgan Live, or one that certainly has had a lot of exposure when he was answering some questions to one student at Stanford University. Somebody who spent a lot of time in the past, before I did these talk shows, speaking on college campuses. I appreciate the amount of preparation and patience that he demonstrates as well. Serves as the William E. Simon Senior Research Fellow in American Principles and Public Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Also the founder and editor of Public Discourse, Ethics, Law, and the Common Good. He has graduated from Princeton University, Phi Beta Kappa, as well as has a master's degree and a PhD in political philosophy from the University of Notre Dame. In the past, he has served in a number of capacities as the assistant editor of First Things, and of course has appeared on all sorts of different talk shows. He's been on this program with us in the past, as he is one of the co-authors of the book, What is Marriage? And of course, he has a new book that is coming out. I have the digital copy of it right now, and you'll be able to get it shortly. Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. Ryan Anderson, it's a delight to have you on the program with us today.
Thank you. Happy to be with you.
I appreciate the good work that you do. As somebody who's been in the same kind of situations sometimes as you have, having very hostile audiences fire questions, you are very calm under fire. You have your facts and figures together, and it's always just a privilege to learn from you, either on program like this or vicariously by watching some of the videos in which you've handled yourself. So we certainly appreciate the work that you've done. And let's get into this new book, because one of the questions that you raise early on is, will individuals who disagree with the Supreme Court decision that was rendered by 5 justices, will we be labeled as bigots, or can we learn maybe some lessons from the decision that came down of Roe versus Wade in 1973 on pro-life? So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, this is really the central thesis of my new book, is that it's going to be up to us to determine whether we're treated like pro-lifers or like bigots. The idea here is that after Roe v. Wade, the pro-life movement was successful in labeling Roe v. Wade as judicial activism. They said it wasn't the last word about abortion, that the court told a lie about both the Constitution and unborn children, and that they weren't going to accept it as the truth. Step 2, they protected their freedom. They said the court might have just said that a woman has a right to choose abortion, but that doesn't mean that the government can force pro-life citizens to pay for abortion or to perform abortion. So the pro-life movement made it very clear that the government should not be discriminating against or coercing or penalizing any American citizen because they believed in the sanctity of life. We need to do both of those two things right now on the marriage issue. We have to say that the Obergefell ruling was judicial activism. It told a lie about our Constitution. It told a lie about the nature of marriage. It's not the last word. And now we need to protect our freedoms to live in accordance with the truth. We need to protect our freedoms to not be penalized or coerced by the government because we believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And the way that we do that is the same thing that the pro-life movement is. We have to bear witness to the truth. For 42 years now, the pro-life movement has been bearing witness to the dignity of unborn human life. We now need to bear witness to the truth about the dignity of marriage as the union of a man and a woman.
Well, and I think in some respects, we may be a little better equipped. Since I'm older than you, and of course, I always talk about this on the air, I was around in 1973, and I'll be honest with you, there weren't a lot of talk shows out. As a matter of fact, this particular talk show that I'm the host of now actually did exist, but it was in a very small market. And after Marlon Maddox died, I took over. I'd been a guest host for many years, but you did not have Focus on the Family. You did not have the Family Research Council. The Heritage Foundation, if it existed, it really was in embryonic form. You didn't have a lot of things going for you. We have a lot more going for us now if we don't retreat and allow the other side to label us as bigots. And the reason they could is up until now, I think you would agree, that those who have been promoting, quote, marriage equality or same-sex marriage have done a pretty good job of trying to compare people who oppose same-sex marriage to people who oppose maybe interracial marriage, or people who oppose same-sex marriage as those who were segregationist. So we really have to change that attitude pretty quickly, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, we have to explain why believing that marriage as the union of a man and a woman is not at all similar to racists who are against interracial marriage, because that's the standard argument that people on the left have been making for several decades now. So we should take the liberals very seriously when they say that if you are against same-sex marriage, you're just like the racist bigots who are against interracial marriage, and we want the law to treat you that way. Just last week they introduced legislation that would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that protects against racism to include sexual orientation and gender identity, so that the law would treat anyone who believes we're created male and female and that male and female are created for each other in marriage as if they're a racist. So we have work to do now, and it's chapter 6 of this new book that really lays out the full argument for why belief that marriage is a union of a man and a woman is not similar either historically, philosophically, or theologically to the belief that skin color has anything to do with marriage. And we need to be able to make that argument in the public square. The basic idea here is that the marriage is about uniting male and female, husband and wife, mother and father. That understanding of marriage has no bearing on race. So marriage laws have to be colorblind, but they can't be gender blind. A man and a woman can unite in marriage regardless of their racial heritage, and children need a mother and a father regardless of their racial heritage. That explains why throughout human history, marriage was a colorblind institution up until the racists introduced racial requirements, largely to prop up a system of race-based slavery. This didn't have anything to do with the nature of marriage. This only had to do with racism.
Yes. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I would like to get into a little bit of the truth of marriage, because some of that also ties back to the earlier book, What is Marriage?, which, by the way, I just thought was an outstanding book. And, of course, you were one of the 3 authors of that book. And we'll talk about that. Of course, Robert George is an individual that we quote quite often as well. And then we'll work our way into Chapter 6, because I certainly think we need to make an argument there. And also really want to try, as you do in the book, to answer some of the questions about, well, isn't it possible that a same-sex couple can do just as good a job raising children as an opposite-sex couple? In other words, couldn't a same-sex marriage do as well in terms of nurturing as a traditional marriage? Because you quote from a number of individuals, including Professor Regness at University of Texas and others. So I do want to get into all the controversial aspects of that and give, of course, a chance for our callers to join the conversation today. This is a new book out called Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. We'll also get into some of the religious freedom issues that we talk about oftentimes with people like Kelly Shackelford or Jay Sekulow on our Friday weekend edition when we focus on the issue of religious liberty. So there is a lot to cover, and be looking for this book by Ryan Anderson. We have information about this book and also a link to his website at the Heritage Foundation so that you can find out more about him and all the good work that is done at heritage.org. But let's take a break. When we come back, we'll get into each one of those particular points, and there is a lot to cover, and we'll do our best in the short amount of time that we have to cover the research that has been put together by Ryan Anderson. So let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kirby Anderson.
If you think about it, many of the stories in the news today have a common denominator, the rule of law. Victor Davis Hanson in a recent column reminds us that the barbarians at the gate are usually not the reason for the downfall of a civilization. Corruption within a country is what collapses a country. Take Greece, for example. He argues that all the German euros in the world will not save Greece if Greeks continue to dodge taxes, featherbed government, and see corruption as a business model. He even goes on to argue that obeying minor laws is important. It is no coincidence that a country where drivers routinely flout traffic laws and throw trash out the window is also a country that cooks its books and lies to creditors. Everything from littering to speeding seems negotiable in Athens in a way that is not true of Munich, Zurich, or London. Of course, we can also apply the same principle to other countries in the world. If you've ever traveled to countries in Africa, the Middle East, or South America, you recognize the same disregard for the rule of law. If you want to get something done in these countries, you need to figure out which government official needs to be bribed. If you're involved in a business, a government inspector is usually looking for a kickback. In many countries, your advancement in business or government is determined not by your resume, not by any merit. Your economic class or your family connections or your tribe determines your success. If you need a public service, your success is determined by who you know or your position on a family tree. At this point, you may be thinking how grateful you are to be living in America. We're blessed to have less corruption than many other countries, but we also appear to be heading down the same path. We have a president that has been unwilling to enforce certain laws. Sanctuary cities ignore immigration laws. Politicians at the federal and state level have been charged with corruption. We desperately need to reinforce the belief in the rule of law before America looks like these other countries. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Ryan Anderson with us today as we are talking about his new book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. We'll open up the phones a little bit later to give you a chance to ask a question or make a comment, but let's see if we can kind of work our way through some of the points you made, the truth about marriage, the consequences of redefining marriage, and then this issue of whether or not the court ruled effectively and whether this was judicial tyranny. What about the truth about marriage? This should be basic, but again, I think you have done a very good job on the previous book, What is Marriage? But you cover it again in this book because it's important to recognize what marriage is and, most importantly, what marriage is not.
Sure. You know, what I do in this new book, I kind of build off of what we had done in the previous book. The previous book was written by a classmate of mine from Princeton and a professor of ours at Princeton. And the three of us really made a robust philosophical argument defending marriage as a union of a man and a woman. And then I've spent the past 3 or so years giving lectures on college campuses, helping to break down that argument to undergraduates, frequently at elite secular schools, who weren't interested in hearing a biblical argument, a theological argument, needed to hear a philosophical argument, needed to hear a secular argument. So what I do in the first two chapters of the book is I really just unpack that argument. I try to explain it in ways that can be repeated by readers, because one of the things I kept hearing from people is, you know, when we read your first book, when we hear your talks, we're nodding along. We're, you know, our heads, you know, nodding up and down as we listen or as we read. And then when we get in a conversation, we can't repeat the argument to our friends.
Right.
So we wanted to make this the type of thing that anyone who has a high school education can read the book and then be an advocate in the public square. The basic idea here is that marriage is based on three secular truths: an anthropological truth that men and women are distinct and complementary, a biological fact that reproduction requires both a man and a woman, and then a social reality that children deserve both a mother and a father. When you put those three things together, you can see why governments in permanently and exclusively as husband and wife. So then children have both a mother and a father. Because when this doesn't happen, the social consequences, the social costs run high for the children, for the spouses, and for the entire community. So in Truth Overruled, the future of marriage and religious freedom, I really try to show how these secular truths, there's no disconnect between faith and reason, between the Bible and social science, between the best of philosophy and the best of theology, that all truth comes from the same source, and that we need to be able to defend truth from a variety of perspectives, given who our audience is.
Well, and again, I think that is very important because, as I've pointed out, in lots of different contexts, whether we're talking about, as we did in the first hour, abortion and Planned Parenthood, or whether we're talking now about marriage, that certainly when you're talking to an audience that's convinced, especially an audience that has a biblical point of view, you can use biblical arguments. But most of our culture today is very secular. And even if you're talking to Christians, lots of times they have more of a secular mindset. So you have to argue to your conclusions rather than arguing from, certain kinds of philosophical or especially biblical presuppositions. So that's why I think the way in which you argue that is so helpful, because whether you're on an elite university campus where you've spent a fair amount of time, or whether you're just simply talking to your next door neighbor, your friend, coworker, or something like that, you need to figure out how to make arguments of common grace. And I think that's the case. As you point out, there are at least three different elements: this anthropological argument, as well as a biological fact, which should be pretty obvious, but then also this issue of a mother and a father. Take that third one for just a minute before we move on, because there is this argument that seems to say today that parents are interchangeable. You can be that it really doesn't make any difference. And I know that at both Family Research Council and at the Heritage Foundation, you've put together huge databases, which essentially, if you want to summarize them quickly, say that as you look at all the refereed journals and you look at all the various articles, frankly, we come to kind of a pretty obvious conclusion, and that is the best situation for a child is a father and a mother, right?
Yeah, I mean, more or less, I go through chapter and verse, dozens of different social science studies that have consistently shown that the best place for a child is to be raised by their married biological mother and father, and that all three aspects of what I just said matter. The marriage matters, the biology matters, and the mother and father matters. Another way of saying that is stability matters, gender matters, and biology matters. This explains why marriage makes a difference in the life of their children. Having both a mother and a father matters, because men and women aren't interchangeable. There's no such thing as parenting. There's mothering and there's fathering. Men and women bring different gifts to the parenting enterprise. So that's the gender part. Biology also matters. It's not just any old mother and any old father. We actually see in the data that the biological mother and the biological father bring certain advantages to the parenting enterprise. Children benefit not when they're being raised by any old mom and dad, but by their mom and dad. And you can see this at an intuitive level. If you and your wife checked into a hospital and she's pregnant with your child, when you check out 48 hours later, you care which baby they give you. You don't just want any old baby, you want your baby.
Yes.
And the same thing's true for the children, and then lastly, stability matters. We know that whether it's divorce and remarriage, cohabitation, anything that's not a stable relationship produces worser outcomes for a child. And so the reason that marriage produces such good outcomes, it's a permanent, monogamous, exclusive relationship between a mother and a father, hopefully the biological mother and father. That's going to be the gold standard for children. This can't always take place. I mean, we know, look, we're fallen. There's human frailty. Sometimes you need to separate from an abusive spouse. Sometimes a husband's not willing to commit. A boyfriend's not willing to commit. Sometimes a child needs to be adopted. But we never uphold those relationships as the ideal. The problem with redefining marriage is that it actually changes what the ideal is. And it says that men and women are interchangeable, that mothers and fathers are replaceable.
Yes. Again, talking a little bit about the truth of marriage, but let me move on to the next point, and that is the consequences of redefining marriage. You've heard it before, Ryan, I have as well, and when I've written about this, a lot of times people say, well, wait, just be honest here. Well, how does my same-sex marriage affect your marriage? And my answer is, well, probably it doesn't affect it, but how does it affect the culture? There are some very significant consequences to redefining marriage, aren't there?
Oh, yeah. So now we're in chapter 2 of the book, but this is really helpful to go through kind of systematically, because the idea here is that I point to 4 different consequences of redefining marriage, and all 4 fall under the general rubric of ideas have consequences and bad ideas have bad consequences. And what you do is you replace one vision of what marriage is, a union of men and women, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, with a different vision, a vision of marriage where it's about consenting adult romance. And so the first consequence that I mentioned is that there will be no institution that upholds the ideal that every child deserves both a mother and a father. What redefining marriage does is it says it's more about the desires of the adults involved than about the needs or the rights of the children involved. And it really sends a message that mothers and fathers are interchangeable and therefore they're replaceable. Right now, we know that 40% of all American children are born to single mothers. It's 50% of Hispanics, and it's 70% of African Americans. Gay marriage didn't cause that problem. Heterosexuals who bought into liberal ideology about sex caused that problem. But same-sex marriage will make the problem worse, because it will be very hard for our culture to insist that fathers are essential when Anthony Kennedy has redefined marriage to make fathers optional. That's one of the consequences. Redefining marriage might not impact you and your marriage, but it'll impact your children and your grandchildren and what they come to believe marriage is and why marriage matters.
Let me jump in because we have one of those breaks, but I want to come back to some of the other things you talk about, because you talk about the norm of monogamy as well as the norm of exclusivity and a couple of others. So I want to get into that, but coming up to a break. And of course, we'll give you a chance to join the conversation a little bit later in the broadcast, 1-800-351-1212. But if you'd like to know more about Ryan Anderson, you can click on his picture and that will take you to heritage.org and his bio. If you'd like to know more about some of the things that we are talking about today, we've posted many articles in the past about this. And of course, be looking for the book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. And I think you're going to find that as a helpful handbook, not only to understand the importance of this decision, and he does have quite a number of quotes from not only the 5 Supreme Court justices, but also the 4 dissents, but also about the truth of marriage, the consequences of redefining marriage, and of course, this issue of judicial tyranny. And if we have time, we might get into something that will be probably a little more familiar territory, what he calls bake me a cake bigot, because we've dealt with some of those religious liberty issues, and also trying to answer the question, isn't sexual orientation just like race? We've sort of given a little bit of an answer there, but we'll get into some more of that as well. All of it available at our website, pointofview.net. And please take the time, not only as we're talking today in the second hour about marriage, but as we talked about in the first hour about abortion and Planned Parenthood, we have our Take Action item, and that is an opportunity for you to contact your 2 senators and your representative and let them know what you think about whether or not we should defund Planned Parenthood. We have the video there for you to watch, and so there's just some great resources that we make available to you so that we can equip you to make a difference. And of course, right now we're trying to educate you and empower you to be equipped to make that difference. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after this.
What can you get for $5? In most cases, you can't even get a value meal at a fast food restaurant. But I'll tell you one thing $5 can do. If every listener to Point of View sent just $5 this week, believe it or not, and someone here did the math, Point of View could pay the bills for the next 3 years. That's what the numbers said. $5, 3 years. That's how many of you there are and how little it takes to keep us going. The problem is, most of our listeners have never contributed. Never. To make up for those who don't, others give large gifts, hundreds, even thousands, or monthly donations of $30, $65, $100. I don't know what you can do, but I encourage you to do what you can today, even if that's $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net. or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for doing your part for Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kirby Anderson.
Back to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We'll get to some of those phone calls in just a minute. Dr. Ryan Anderson with us today as we talk about his book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. I want to put a little more on the table before I take our first call. And you talk about the norm of monogamy, the norm of exclusivity, the norm of permanence. How does that relate to this whole idea of what could happen and what will happen as we redefine marriage?
Sure. One of the things that I argue in the book is that sexual complementarity is the foundation upon which monogamy, exclusivity, and permanency are built. It's precisely because marriage is a union of man and woman that it's a union of two and only two people, for example. Why is that? Because it's one man and one woman who can unite in the marital act that can create new life, and every new life has one mother and one father. And that's why marriage is a union of two and only two. And that's why we want marriage to be a permanent union and to be an exclusive union, because we only want people having sex with each other when they're committed to each other, so that if any children are created, they're created within the context of a loving family that will provide them with a mother and a father. But once the court says the male-female part about marriage is irrational and arbitrary, what's the principal basis for monogamy? What's magical about the number two? Yes. Once you say the male-female part is irrational and arbitrary. And so already we've seen the arguments coming for polygamy and polyamory. The day of the Supreme Court's decision, as if they had the article waiting to go, just waiting to hit the publish button, Political Magazine ran a piece saying that now is the time to legalize polygamy and polyamory, that this was the next frontier of the civil rights movement. And we just saw last week, ABC News did a profile of a polyamorous family. This is a three-person, they're called a throuple or a triad, and all three are married to each other. It's a man with two wives, but the wives are also married to each other. So it's not polygamy, it's polyamory, and they have two children together.
It's just amazing.
And it's very hard to say, because the problem with the Supreme Court's ruling is it said marriage is just about consenting adult romance and caregiving. If that's what marriage is about, well, three people can consent to love each other and care for each other and raise children with each other. Once we go away from the one man, one woman, it's very hard to know why we're talking about the number two at all. And that's one of those consequences Chapter 2 highlights, because when you get away from the truth about marriage, it's harder to defend the kind of parameters, the marital norms of monogamy, exclusivity, and permanence.
Yeah, and again, even the Chief Justice said, occasionally the five justices, or in particular Justice Kennedy, puts in the word two every once in a while, but why stop at two? Because every argument really for same-sex marriage is an argument for polygamy, I would think, and so we certainly are seeing that. That article coming out on Politico show that's exactly what people were thinking. Let's take some phone calls along the way. You talked about the divorce rate, so I think Becky wants to get into that issue, so we'll go out to California first. KYCC. Becky, you're on with Ryan Anderson.
Hi, Ryan. This is Becky, and I just have a couple of difficult thought processes during arguments. I know what I believe as a Christian, and I know the whole statement behind everything is really that ideally we're talking about the best situation for children and the best situation for families, and that God has created marriage. But at the same time, I find it very difficult when I'm having conversations with friends who are interested in, interested in their gay marriage and having the rights that they would like to have. And the argument regularly comes up that if a male and female marriage has done so well in the past, why is our divorce rate so high? Why is the Christian divorce rate so high? And it always seems to be a point in argument that, I pause and I ask. And then, of course, we can get into the whole adoption thing when there are children who need parents, there aren't any parents, and then passing judgment on whether or not it's acceptable for, two males, two females, whatever situation, to provide an adoptive family there. So just your thoughts on that would be great.
Yeah, great questions. And, so I should say that, this book is really what's the big deal if we now include same-sex relationships in this? And what I try to do in this book is say that the problem here isn't with gay marriage. The problem here is with a bad understanding of marriage, period, and that many heterosexuals have bought into this bad understanding of marriage, that the redefinition of marriage started about 50 years ago. it comes out of the sexual revolution. It comes out of the 60s, where you hear phrases like marriage should last as long as the love lasts. And then we get the legal redefinition of marriage with no-fault divorce. So prior to the introduction of no-fault divorce, marriage had a strong legal expectation of being a permanent relationship. With no-fault divorce, you could now abandon your spouse for any reason at all. You didn't have to even cite grounds for divorce. You have a stronger legal obligation to your plumber or your roofer than you do to your husband or wife. And so what we saw was divorce rates more than doubled. The one caveat here about your question, I'll just say that church-going Christians, their divorce rates are much lower than nominal Christians. You hear the statistics that Christians divorce at the same rate as all Americans. That's only true if you don't actually make a distinction between those who go to church every Sunday and those who just go to church on Easter or Christmas or something like that. That's just to say that heterosexuals caused this problem. Heterosexuals caused this problem when they bought into a bad liberal ideology about marriage. The problem with the Supreme Court ruling is that it just cemented that liberal ideology into our law. The bad vision of marriage was that marriage is about consenting adult romance and caregiving, and that when the consenting adult romance ends, the marriage should end, and that the consenting adult should place the terms of the marriage. If you want to have an open marriage or a closed marriage, if you want to have a temporary marriage or a permanent marriage, it's all up to the consenting adults involved. Because of Justice Kennedy. But the legal redefinition of marriage followed on the cultural redefinition of marriage. So what I try to do in this book is to say that same-sex marriage is both a symptom and a cause of the problem. But the deeper cause is the sexual revolution, and we really need to think about how our response to that should be conducted.
The other thing I might just add real quickly to Becky is the premise is wrong. One of the things that we have talked about before with Shanti Feldhahn, and she was on our program back in December, we did a whole program on the myths about divorce rates. And as you point out, there are a lot of myths running around, and the divorce rate, first of all, isn't 50%. Second of all, the divorce rate of Christians isn't comparable to non-Christians. So the premise is wrong in the first place, but it's just one more piece of information to add to it. Let's keep moving down the road, because I want to certainly get into the chapter on judicial tyranny. You've already alluded to this, but Justice Kennedy defined marriage in a way that certainly allows for polygamy, but also had to really kind of wrench the 14th Amendment in a way that is inappropriate. So what are some of the comments that you might want to have our listeners know about in terms of how the Supreme Court ruled on this case?
Sure. What I do, this I guess is now the third chapter, is that I go through Kennedy's majority opinion and then all four of the dissenting opinions, because the Chief Justice, Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito, all four of them filed dissents, and they just blow Kennedy's opinion out of the water. Because the reality here is that there's nothing in the U.S. Constitution that requires a redefinition of marriage. The U.S. Constitution is silent on what marriage is. And where the Constitution is silent, we, the people, retain authority to make law and to make policy. And there are two different visions of marriage. One vision of marriage says marriage is about a comprehensive union of sexually complementary spouses where a man and a woman unite permanently and exclusively as husband and wife so that children have a mom and a dad. That's one vision. The other vision is that marriage is about consenting adult romance of whatever size or shape the consenting adults most desire. That's the other vision. Our Constitution doesn't tell us which of those two visions is the true vision, and both of those visions can be applied equally to all Americans. And so marriage equality is dependent on marriage reality. Only if you know the reality of what marriage is can you know if any given legal policy is treating all marriages equally or not. And Kennedy and the other four liberal justices simply said, we prefer the consenting adult romance vision of marriage, and we're going to claim the U.S. Constitution requires all 50 states to embrace that vision as well. This is judicial tyranny. This is the judicial branch of the government legislating. It's making policy. It's redefining what marriage is. And as the four dissenting justices point out, it causes harm to democratic self-government. It causes harm to the institution of marriage. It causes harm to civil harmony, a peaceful coexistence. And then lastly, it causes harm to religious liberty. And we're going to see all four of those harms play out in the years to come.
Going to take a break, and when we come back, we'll maybe skip over a few of the chapters. One, Chapter 4, Bake Me a Cake, Bigot, because we have kind of talked a little bit about some of the religious liberty issues and the basic human right, and get to that key chapter, Chapter 6, on sexual orientation is not like race. And we'll try to get in a few more phone calls, but at the same time, we want to give you as much of an opportunity to hear from Dr. Ryan Anderson as possible. The only way to, of course, get the full argument is to, of course, get a copy of the book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. We'll continue our conversation with him right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Dr. Ryan Anderson with us for just a few more minutes as we talk about his book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. Might get to some more phone calls, but let's first see if we can spend a little bit of time in Chapter 6 about these anti-discrimination laws. We call them sometimes SOGI laws. That stands for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Laws. We've talked quite a bit about that in terms of what is happening in various states and local municipalities. So first of all, that issue. Of course, we also have ENDA, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act. What about some of these pieces of legislation? I think in some respects, they could make the decision that's come down from the Supreme Court even worse.
That's exactly right. I mean, so what the Equality Act seeks to do is add the phrase sexual orientation and gender identity to every existing federal law that protects against racism. What this bill would do is say that if you believe we're created male and female and that male and female are created for each other in marriage, and you act on that belief, whether it's in your business or in your school or in your charity, that would now be the type of thing that the federal government could penalize, could criminalize in a variety of ways, whether it's with your tax status, whether it's with accreditation, whether it's with licensing, whether it's government grants, government contracts, government loans. The campaign for the past decades from some activists on the left has been that if you believe this, it's just like being a racist. I think what we need to do is suggest that ordinary Americans don't agree with that position. Ordinary Americans say, even if I'm in favor of gay marriage, I don't think the 70-year-old grandmother who believes marriage is the union of a man and a woman is the same thing as Bull Connor. Mm-hmm. I don't think Catholic charity adoption agencies trying to find homes for children with married moms and dads is the same thing as Jim Crow. And so one of the things we need to do is point out it's reasonable to think that being created male and female matters, that black and white doesn't impact our identity and our lives in the way that male and female do. One of the ways that we can see this is that you can think about Martin Luther King Jr.'s statement that, he has a dream that his children will be judged not by the color of their skin, but the content of their characters. Right? Skin color is utterly irrelevant to the content of our characters. That's why King draws that comparison there. But the types of relationships that we form, do we form a same-sex or an opposite-sex relationship? Do we provide a child with both a mother and a father or with two moms or two dads? Those are the types of activities that go to the heart of analysis and evaluation. And so it's reasonable for the baker to say, I bake wedding cakes only for weddings, not for same-sex ceremonies. It's reasonable for the adoption agency to say, we want to find children in a home with a mom and a dad. Whereas it wouldn't be reasonable if they said that somehow skin color factored into this.
And this is one of the places where we have to do a lot of work with the intelligentsia, the academy, or even some of the bureaucrats, not with the kind of the basic American live and let live kind of philosophy, because most of the surveys I've shown show a very significant majority of Americans say we should not force a florist, a baker, a photographer, an innkeeper to actually participate in a same-sex marriage if they would disagree with that. And so it's not the problem there. I mean, I think the general public is with us on that. But it is with a bureaucrat in Oregon or a human rights group in Colorado or New Mexico, or what you find on the university campuses that maybe needs some convincing and maybe some robust debate.
Yeah, I mean, I think the idea here is to, the reason I wrote this book was to help ordinary Americans better understand people who they disagree with. I was at Princeton as an undergraduate, and most of my classmates are secular liberals who were pro-choice. But precisely because they could understand why I was pro-life, they were more likely to respect my freedom not to have to pay for abortion or to perform abortion. They could say, I disagree with Ryan about abortion, but I don't want the government forcing him to violate his beliefs. The problem right now is that most secular elites don't understand why people like us believe marriage is the union of a man and a woman. And if they can't even understand why we believe it, they're less likely to respect our freedoms to act on that belief. So we need to make the case in our own voices for why we believe what we believe, so that people can say, even though I disagree with you, I see you're coming at it from a reasonable perspective, and I'm not going to have the government coerce you. If ordinary Americans think that the Westboro Baptist Church speaks for all social conservatives, we're going to have a serious problem. So we need to speak for ourselves so that Westboro Baptist Church can't speak on our behalf.
Well said. Of course, you have a whole chapter on building a movement and really trying to take some of these ideas and expand them. So you've done a very good job, obviously, of writing this, and I would encourage people to get a copy of the book. But just before we leave, let's talk about what is available also at the Heritage Foundation. Outstanding organization. I've supported it for many, many years, and you are, of course, the Senior Research Fellow in American Principles and Public Policy. So talk about what people find when they land at heritage.org.
Sure. You can find many of our background reports about important issues of public policy, about pending legislation, about trends in the culture. We just released the 2015 Index of Culture and Opportunity, looking at how both economic and social policy contribute to an opportunity society. You can find many of our timely op-eds and articles at the Daily Signal, which is our news source. And then you can go to Amazon right now, and you can get the Kindle edition of this new book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. You can go to Barnes & Noble and get the Nook. You can go to the iTunes store and get the iBook. And then at the end of August, the print copies will begin to ship, and you can pre-order those now. So if you prefer to have a hard copy of the book, you can go online and order that. But if you want, the ebook, and I know a lot of young people prefer ebooks, those are ready instantaneously. You can just log on right now and get a copy within a minute.
Well, I'm going to have I already have my digital one, but I'm going to get my printed one too, and might even have you back once it comes out there to give it some visibility as well. It deserves to be on the New York Times bestseller list, and we'll do what I can to see if we can make that happen. So, Ryan, always great to have you on the program. Let's do it again sometime soon.
Oh, thank you. Very happy to be with you.
Again, the book is entitled Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom. It has chapters on the truth about marriage and the consequences of redefining marriage, the issue of judicial tyranny, a whole section on Bake Me a Cake Bigot, and we didn't get into that too much today, but that's something that will help you understand a little bit about some of the religious liberty issues that we've dealt with, the issue of whether or not it is a basic human right for marriage equality, sexual orientation not like a race, some that we've ignored simply because we ran out of time. Who are the victims? What are some of the other consequences? And then, of course, building a movement. So some great resources that are all in the book, and I hope you'll take the time to also go to heritage.org to find out a little bit more about some of those other resources. I use the Backgrounder and the Daily Signal on a regular basis, and I think you'll find those helpful as well. Hope that this has been an interesting discussion today. We spent some time in the first hour talking about Planned Parenthood and had a chance to talk to two different guests. And we did, as I mentioned before, posted the article by Anika Smith, which I think you will find very helpful, on Planned Parenthood abortionist haggles over payments. So if you wanted to get a little more perspective, you can get that article. We have the take action items for you to contact your two senators and your representative, your three elected representatives, I might say, overall. And of course, then the video, in case you haven't had a chance to see it. I wouldn't encourage you to watch it over lunch, although these conversations were taking place over lunch, which says a lot about the individuals that are participating in it. And, of course, my Viewpoints commentary today on the rule of law, which I would encourage you to read. And maybe on some of these things, click that Facebook button, put it on your Facebook page, and you'll start a conversation, and it will be an opportunity for you to have an influence in your particular area where you are having an influence, and we hope that you will do so very, very quickly. We're making this available to you. Take advantage of those, and you'll find all of it at the website, pointofview.net. I want to thank Andrew, and certainly want to thank Chris and Matthew for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. We'll see you back here tomorrow.
What does a hero look like? I remember a woman stricken with MS. She was in a wheelchair, and every week after church, people would get down on a knee and greet her and pray for her. But do you know what caught my eye? The seemingly invisible man behind the wheelchair, silently caring for his beloved, sacrificing for her. In the Bible, Jesus talked about a big giver who had a marching band come with him as he dumped his treasure in the temple coffers. But Jesus saw a woman who gave a tiny gift that was actually huge. If you appreciate Point of View but can't give $30 or $65 or more, well, get this. If every listener gave $5, it would pay our bills for the next 3 years. 3 years. Give $5 today. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for being our hero. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.